If your last name is Cohen, Cohn, Kahn, Katz, Katzman, or Kagan, an oral tradition your family has carried for over 3,000 years claims you descend, father to son, in an unbroken line, from one specific man, the brother of Moses. If your name is Levi, Levine, Levinson, or Segal, tradition places your ancestry inside the same priestly tribe that once served the ancient temple in Jerusalem. For most of history, there was no way to test a claim like that. In 1997, geneticists finally found a way. And what they discovered inside the Y-chromosome split this story into two completely different directions, one confirming something remarkable about an ancient claim, the other revealing a twist nobody expected. This is the real science behind these 10 surnames and the genetic detective work that actually tested one of the oldest continuously maintained family traditions in human history. In Jewish tradition, the priesthood, known as the Kohanim, traces back to Aaron, brother of Moses, appointed according to the Torah as the first high priest roughly 3,300 years ago. Unlike most inherited titles or family stories, Cohen status isn't casual folklore passed down loosely. It's a formal, actively maintained religious designation, passed strictly from father to son, still observed today in specific synagogue rituals, blessings, and religious obligations that only men identified as Kohanim are permitted to perform, including the distinctive priestly blessing delivered with a particular hand gesture recognized across Jewish communities worldwide. A closely related status, Levite, traces to the wider tribe of Levi, also tied to specific ceremonial roles, historically including duties like assisting in temple service and, in many communities today, being called to the Torah immediately after a Cohen during religious readings. For 3,000 years, families kept this designation alive through nothing but continuous, generation-to-generation record and religious practice, with no genetic testing available to check whether the underlying claim of shared ancestry actually held up. Surviving exile, expulsion, and diaspora across dozens of countries and centuries purely through memory and religious discipline. In 1996, Israeli geneticist Karl Skorecki found himself sitting in synagogue, watching a Cohen give the traditional priestly blessing, and found himself wondering something almost nobody had ever formally tested. If Kohanim really do share a common paternal ancestor going back 3 millennia, that shared ancestry should, in theory, be detectable in their Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed essentially unchanged from father to son, generation after generation, accumulating only rare, slow mutations along the way. Here is the first real crack this actually produced. Skorecki, working with population geneticist Michael Hammer, tested Y chromosome markers in men who self-identified as Kohanim, compared against the wider Jewish population, and published the results in the journal Nature in 1997. The Kohanim showed a distinctly different distribution of genetic markers compared to non-Cohen Jewish men, and remarkably, that same distinctive pattern showed up in Kohanim from both Ashkenazi and Sephardic communities, two Jewish populations that had already been geographically separated from each other for close to 1,000 years, one shaped by life across Central and Eastern Europe, the other by life across Spain, North Africa, and the wider Mediterranean by the time of the study. Shared ancestry that predates that 1,000-year separation, showing up independently in two communities living continents apart with limited contact between them, pointed toward something deeper, a common paternal line stretching back before the wider Jewish diaspora scattered communities across the world in the first place. A follow-up study expanded the genetic markers used and found something even more striking. A specific 6-marker genetic signature, later nicknamed the Cohen Modal Haplotype, showed up in 97 out of 106 Kohanim tested, a pattern researchers calculated had less than a 1 in 10,000 chance of appearing. This consistently by random coincidence alone, a statistical result strong enough to make headlines well beyond the world of academic genetics. Picture the ancient temple in Jerusalem, roughly 3,000 years ago, a priestly line already functioning as a formal hereditary institution, sons following fathers into ceremonial duties passed down as a matter of religious law rather than casual family memory. Unlike almost every other ancient lineage claim in human history, which relies purely on oral tradition and written genealogy with no way to verify it, this particular claim came with a built-in, unintentional genetic record, quietly accumulating in the Y chromosomes of every son born into that same unbroken paternal line for over 100 generations, waiting silently until a geneticist finally thought to go looking for it. Here's the twist that turns this into a more nuanced, more scientifically honest story than a simple one ancestor confirmation. When Michael Hammer's team returned in 2009 with a far larger battery of genetic markers, they found the Kohanim weren't descended from just one founding father after all. The extended data resolved 2 distinct, unrelated paternal lineages among modern Kohanim, each one independently common across different Jewish communities worldwide, alongside evidence of at least one more distinct lineage among Levites specifically. Instead of a single clean genetic thread running back to one individual, the priesthood, as it exists today, appears to trace back to a small handful of independent founding lines, established and maintained separately, rather than one unbroken chain from a single ancestor. There's an important scientific caveat worth adding honestly, since not every researcher accepts every part of this story equally. Some later analysis found the Cohen Modal Haplotype also appears at lower frequency among certain non-Jewish populations in the Eastern Mediterranean, including some Greek and Armenian men, a reminder that the marker reflects a broader ancient Near Eastern genetic backdrop, not something biologically exclusive to Jewish ancestry alone. The genetic evidence supports a real, ancient, shared paternal line, specifically within the Kohanim tradition. It doesn't, on its own, prove every detail of the biblical account. Then comes the second half of the story, the part almost nobody expects, and it involves the Levite surnames on this list: Levi, Levine, Levinson, and Segal specifically. In 2003, a separate study examining the Y-chromosomes of Ashkenazi Levites, published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, found something genuinely startling. Rather than tracing primarily to the same ancient Near Eastern lineages found in the Kohanim, the majority of Ashkenazi Levite men tested carried a Y-chromosome lineage most closely associated with European populations, specifically a genetic marker common across parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. A pattern researchers estimated originated roughly 1,000 years ago, not 3,000. The likely explanation is almost more interesting than a clean, unbroken ancient lineage would have been. At some point, roughly 1,000 years ago, a single European man, quite possibly a convert to Judaism, or a man who joined the Levite line through a path lost to written history, appears to have become the founding paternal ancestor for a very large share of today's Ashkenazi Levite families. His European Y chromosome then propagated forward through a Jewish religious lineage for the next 40 or so generations, carried by descendants who had no way of knowing, reciting the same prayers and performing the same ceremonial roles as their ancestors believed Levites always had, that their status traced back not to ancient Israel, but to medieval Europe. So if your surname is Cohen, Cohn, Kahn, Katz, Katzman, or Kagan, the genetic evidence available today does support something real and remarkable. A shared ancient paternal line among a meaningful share of men carrying that tradition, split across at least two independent founding fathers rather than one, consistent with, though not definitive proof of, a lineage stretching back toward the priesthood's ancient origins. And if your surname is Levi, Levine, Levinson, or Segal, the honest scientific answer is stranger, and in its own way, more remarkable still. A tradition understood for 1,000 years as unbroken ancient Israelite inheritance appears, for a large share of Ashkenazi Levite families, to actually trace back to a single medieval European man who joined that lineage and quietly became its genetic founder, his descendants carrying his DNA forward through a religious identity built on a different story entirely. Both threads, the ancient and the medieval, the expected and the unexpected, are still being carried forward today in the blood of men who mostly have no idea which version of the story their own Y chromosome actually tells. What makes this particular piece of genetic research stand apart from most ancestry science isn't just what it found, it's what it was testing in the first place. A specific, precisely worded, 3,000-year-old claim, kept alive not by guesswork or family legend, but by an unbroken chain of religious practice disciplined enough that modern genetics could actually walk up to it and check the math. Most oral traditions, this old, dissolve into myth long before anyone can test them. This one, it turns out, was carrying an answer inside it the entire time. Half of it exactly where tradition said it would be, and half of it pointing somewhere tradition never expected.